In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, April 9th, here in South Korea. The country's general election takes place tomorrow, that is Wednesday, April 10th, with voters heading to polling stations to elect lawmakers for the 22nd National Assembly. Also, on the local front, the number of one-person households surpasses 10 million as of March this year, accounting for over 40% of Korea's total households. Meanwhile, on the international front, Israel says a date has been set for its ground offensive into the city of Rafah in southern Gaza despite international opposition. We are now counting down less than a day to a crucial parliamentary race whose result is widely expected to determine the fate of the Yoon administration's future domestic and foreign policies. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young explains.
After about 2 weeks of competitive election campaigns, all that remains is the people's choice. The April election comes almost 2 years after conservative President Yoon Suk-yeol's victory in the 2022 presidential election, where he narrowly defeated Democratic Party's candidate Lee Jae-myung by a margin of 0.73%, the smallest margin in South Korean history. For this year's election, the number of seats for elected lawmakers has increased to 254 from 253, with one seat taken from the proportional representation bloc, which dropped to 46 from 47, keeping the total number of lawmakers at the National Assembly at 300. Winning at least 150 of the 300 seats grants the party the power to pass budget bills and various laws. Any party that secures 3/5 or more of the National Assembly members, meaning 180 seats or more, will have strong legislative power, including the ability to fast-track bills. In the 2020 general election, the DP and its satellite party won 180 seats, resulting in a minority government with the Yoon administration taking office. Obtaining over 2/3, which is at least 200 National Assembly seats, further strengthens authority, allowing for constitutional amendments, dismissal of legislators, and even the ability to initiate presidential impeachment. As the Yoon administration enters its third year in office, the DP is determined to maintain its dominance to act as a counterbalance to the ruling party and the Yoon administration. For the ruling People Power Party, this year's race is considered crucial because failing to secure a majority could potentially render President Yoon Suk-yeol a lame duck for the remainder of his term. Eyes are now on how the April election will reshape the political landscape for the next 4 years, including the remainder of the Yoon administration's term. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
And while we await the results of the 22nd parliamentary election that kicks off tomorrow, in this next report, my colleague Bae Eun-jae touches upon some of the interesting factors of this latest race based on figures. Do take a listen.
The general election is South Korea's biggest political event this year. You might be wondering how it works and what's different in 2024. Let's take a look at the election by the numbers. The voting age in South Korea is 18 after the country lowered the age limit from 19 in December 2019. Citizens born before April 11, 2006 are eligible to vote in this year's general election. This means more than 44 million Koreans will be heading to almost 15,000 polling stations across the country that'll be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There, voters will receive 2 ballot papers. One is to vote for a candidate running for their constituency, and the other is to vote for the party they support for proportional representation seats. This year, the ballot papers for proportional representation seats are the longest ever used in Korea. It's 51.7 centimeters long, as 38 parties have registered to battle over these seats. This is even longer than the last election in 2020, when the ballot paper was over 48 centimeters long, with 35 parties running. Before that, in 2016 and in 2012, the papers were about 30 centimeters. Just as in the 2020 election, the votes will have to be counted by hand, as electronic counters cannot read papers this long. Moving on to the candidates running for individual districts, the average competition rate stands around 2.8 to 1 this year, the lowest in 39 years. In 2020, the rate was 4.4 to 1. Of the 699 candidates that are registered in 254 districts nationwide, 86% are men, leaving women as an unrepresentative minority. The average age of the candidates is 56.8, 2 years older than in 2020. Those in their 50s took up nearly half of the candidates, followed by those in their 60s and 40s. The youngest candidate is 28 years old, whereas the oldest is 85, born in 1938. By job, 65% of the candidates were professional politicians, 8% were attorneys, and 5% were professors or educators. Doctors and pharmacists accounted for about 1% of the total. The vote count for this year's election is expected to take about 2 more hours than usual and will likely have the final results at around 2 a.m. the next day.
Also, speaking about the contenders for this latest general election, many of them were in the Greater Seoul area back on Monday to rally public support. Our correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
With the April 10th election day just around the corner, South Korea's capital region is heating up with competition. On Monday, just 2 days before final voting for the nation's 22nd general election, leaders across camps are focusing their campaign efforts in Seoul and the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province. The ruling People Power Party's interim leader Han Dong-un visited key cities in Gyeonggi-do province to support running candidates. While originally unannounced, Han later added to his itinerary an additional visit to the city of Incheon, which PPP's Won Hee-dong and the main opposition Democratic Party's leader Lee Jae-myung are racing against. Lee also started his daily campaign in the city before visiting other key districts in Seoul. He too supported other DP candidates in major battlegrounds, namely the Jongno-gu district in central Seoul, a traditional political hotspot. Other minor parties, including the Green Justice, Semire, New Reform, and Rebuilding Korea parties, also made their final push in the capital region. The focus in and near Seoul isn't quite a surprise considering how 122, or nearly half of all 254 electoral districts, are located in the capital region. While the voter turnout rate during last week's early voting marked a record high 31.28%, the figure for the capital Seoul was even higher at 32.63%, possibly suggesting even higher public interest in the region. The PPP attributed the strong turnout to people's judgment toward the main opposition party, while the DP viewed it as a sign of strong public sentiment against the government.
With the release of further opinion poll results restricted until voting finishes on Wednesday, candidates are on the final stretch of their election campaigns. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
There has been a significant demographic development here on the local front. The number of one-person households has surpassed 10 million, accounting for over 40% of Korea's total households. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to data from the Ministry of Interior and Safety on Tuesday, the number of single-person households in South Korea stood at 10,021,413 as of March this year, marking the first time the figure has reached the 10 million mark. That's compared to 9,981,702 single-person households the previous month. Among the over 24 million households nationwide, single-person households make up 41.8%, or 2 out of 5. By age group, those in their 60s make up the highest proportion of people living in single-person households at over 1.86 million, followed by those in their 30s at over 1.68 million, and those in their 50s at over 1.64 million. People in their 70s and above accounted for over 1.98 million. By region, Gyeonggi-do province and Seoul had the highest proportion of single-person households. There were also more men living alone than women. The number of smaller-sized households, which consists of 1- and 2-person households, is increasing, while the number of larger households is decreasing. While the number of 2-person households also increased slightly in March, the number of 4-person households decreased from over 3.12 million households to around 3.11 million. The government believes that the proportion of single-person households is increasing due to the higher number of seniors living alone and the rise in unmarried people. It says it will continue to explore various policies centered on single-person households. In particular, the government is exploring policies related to rising food prices and stable housing as its top priority. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Staying with statistics, the number of female workers here in Korea hit a record high last year. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday show the number of female salary workers standing at nearly 10 million in 2023, up more than 280,000 on year. In fact, women workers also accounted for a record 45.7% of the nation's paid workforce last year. President Yoon Suk-yeol says he will supervise the nation's strategy on artificial intelligence as Korea seeks to become an AI semiconductor powerhouse. According to the presidential office, President Yoon held a related meeting earlier on this Tuesday and further addressed the current status of the government's plan for the construction of the roughly $450 million chip cluster south of Seoul. The envisioned cluster in Yongin City is expected to break ground no later than 2026, with the government supplying the power and water needed by the cluster. President also pledged to explore investment in incentives and to establish a national AI committee to coordinate efforts to ensure a leading global role in the field. Meanwhile, the Biden administration's efforts to shift global chip production into North America are looking to pay off remarkably. Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company will reportedly make its most advanced chips in Arizona, having secured a substantial subsidy pledge from the U.S. Our Shin Se-byuk has more.
The U.S. Department of Commerce announced on Monday a significant subsidy of $6.6 billion to support the Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC. This move aligns with the 2022 CHIPS Act, a flagship policy of U.S. President Joe Biden, aimed at reshoring semiconductor supply chains to the U.S. after a decades-long shift to Asia. The latest announcement exceeds initial estimates by more than 30% from an expected $5 billion. In addition, the initiative includes up to $5 billion in low-interest government loans, bringing the total support to $11.6 billion. Monday's announcement came as TSMC outlined plans to increase its investment in the U.S. from $25 billion to $65 billion and to establish a third factory in Phoenix, Arizona by 2030. This expansion represents the largest foreign direct investment in U.S. history, highlighting TSMC's commitment to growing its U.S. operations. The Commerce Department expects TSMC's U.S. investment to create a significant economic impact by generating about 6,000 manufacturing jobs and 20,000 construction jobs. President Biden, in a statement on Monday, underscored the critical need for this initiative, noting Washington's vulnerability due to its inability to manufacture the most sophisticated semiconductors. He also emphasized that the CHIPS Act positions the U.S. to account for approximately 20% of global production of cutting-edge chips by 2030. Last month, the U.S. government unveiled a nearly $20 billion support package for the American chipmaker Intel. Attention now shifts to Samsung Electronics, with expectations over an announcement related to a subsidy for the South Korean chipmaker next week. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, Israel says a date has been set for its ground offensive into the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, dashing international hopes for a ceasefire in the near future. Our Yoon has details.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that a date has been set for an invasion of Rafah, where some 1.4 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering. No specific date was disclosed, but Netanyahu's remarks appear in direct opposition to reports that truce talks had seen progress. Earlier on Monday, a state-affiliated news channel in Cairo had reported that truce talks between Israel and Hamas, alongside Qatari and Egyptian mediators on Sunday, had all resulted in agreement on basic points. Al Qahira News said a final agreement was expected to be reached within 48 hours. However, contrary to those reports, a Hamas official said no progress had actually been made on a ceasefire for the 6-month-old conflict. The Israeli foreign minister had described the Cairo talks on Sunday as the closest the two sides had come to a deal since a short-lived truce in November. But the Israeli prime minister said an invasion of Rafah was required for Israel's victory in this war.
Today, I received a detailed report on the talks in Cairo. We are constantly working to achieve our goals. First and foremost, the release of all our hostages and achieving a complete victory over Hamas. This victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terrorist battalions there. It will happen. There is a date.
Foreign governments and organizations have spoken out against Israel's plans to launch a Rafah offensive, with the southern city in a desperate condition and an invasion raising fears of further civilian casualties. Jin, Arirang News.
In Haiti, 11 South Koreans were evacuated via helicopter in light of heightened security concerns there. According to Seoul's foreign ministry back on Monday, the Korean nationals were airlifted to the neighboring Dominican Republic. Now, last month, the government here evacuated 2 Koreans from Haiti amid gang violence, which has been escalating dramatically amid a power vacuum. Currently, some 60 South Koreans remain in Haiti. In other news, a leading art museum in Boston is hosting an exhibition chronicling the past and present of Korea's Hallyu. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
Hallyu, or the Korean wave, is making a splash in America like never before. The Museum of Fine Arts Boston is hosting the U.S. debut of the exhibition Hallyu, the Korean wave, back after its first run at London's Victoria and Albert Museum in 2022.
Hallyu really, at this moment, is a global phenomena. The influence it has on different regions around the world, on different generations of people, it's just really amazing. We have a very significant Korean art already, but it's mostly of the art before the 1900s. I think it's very important to show that, creativity, energy, and innovation.
MFA's Hallyu, the Korean wave, showcases around 250 costumes, props, photos, videos, and artworks on Korean popular culture. The first section, From Rubble to Smartphones, delves into Korea's history over the past century through photos, videos, posters, and archival materials.
We think it's very important for people to understand Korea's recent history and how Hallyu really came out of there. And this is an incredible story about resilience and innovation.
Next, visitors explore the present K-culture with outfits worn by K-pop groups aespa and 80s. There are the iconic pink and green suits from the Netflix hit Squid Game and a recreation of the bathroom set from the Oscar-winning film Parasite. Wrapping up the experience is a dance challenge, inviting visitors to try K-pop's synchronized moves. But what distinguishes MFA's Hallyu, the Korean wave, is its blend of past and present. Korean-American artist Julia Kwon's work showcasing patchwork textiles resembling bojagi, a traditional Korean object wrapping cloth, is an example.
My textile work that draws attention to the rise of anti-Asian hate during the COVID-19 pandemic is currently on display in Hallyu. I integrate patterns from contemporary socio-political events into the bojagi design to question people's preconceptions on authenticity and otherness. My work considers what it means to form an Asian feminine identity today within the context of globalism, cultural hybridity, intersectionality.
Hallyu, the Korean wave, runs until July 28th at the MFA's Anne and Graham Gunn Gallery before heading to the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In North America, the first total solar eclipse in 7 years was observed on Monday, with the moon blocking out the sun for just under 4.5 minutes. People gathered all across continent along the path of totality, which ran from Mexico's Pacific coast through Texas and 14 other US states into parts of eastern Canada. Some 31 million people live along the path of totality, and federal officials said that around 5 million people traveled to see the eclipse. The last total solar eclipse in North America was in 2017, which lasted about 2 minutes and 42 seconds. According to NASA, total eclipses can last from 10 seconds up to 7.5 minutes. The next total solar eclipse in the mainland US will be in 2044, while an earlier total eclipse in 2026 can be seen in Greenland, Iceland, Spain, Russia, and Portugal. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned China on Monday that Washington will not have Chinese imports decimating American industries. Wrapping up 4 days of meetings in Beijing, Yellen said in a news conference on Monday that US President Joe Biden is determined to avoid a repeat of the China shock of the early 2000s, where a flood of cheaper Chinese imports destroyed some 2 million American manufacturing jobs. Yellen, since arriving in China the previous week, pressed the US perspective that Chinese industries, fueled by government support, are producing excessively and straining global markets. Yellen also threatened to sanction Chinese banks facilitating transactions to the Russian military, to which the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said on Monday that their cooperation with Russia should not be restricted. Moscow has accused Ukraine of launching very dangerous drone attacks at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station over the past 48 hours. The nuclear power plant has been occupied and run by Russia since 2022. Russia says there were 3 drone attacks on Sunday and that Ukrainian forces attacked the plant again on Monday with a kamikaze drone, which was shot down over one of the reactors. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, condemned the drone strike on Monday, saying that no one can conceivably benefit and attacking a nuclear power plant is an absolute no-go. Ukraine has denied being behind the attacks. A British man successfully completed a monumental journey running the length of Western Africa on Sunday. 27-year-old Russ Cook began his extreme run last April from Cape Agulhas in South Africa and ran over 16,000 kilometers through 16 countries to finish in Ras Angela in Tunisia. Cook, who is the first person to run the length of the entire African continent, took 352 days to complete the run. Although Cook was faced with challenges, including a kidnapping and armed robbery, as well as hurdles with visas, he persevered in his mission to raise funds for charity. Cook received over $880,000 in donations. Kim Xiang, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We are having another warm, dry, but windy spring day, meaning the nation is on high alert against wildfires. Except on Jeju Island, the mainland is under the second highest level of forest fire warnings. A dry weather advisory remains in place in the capital, while the southeast coast is under a strong wind advisory today. Well, afternoon temperatures look to be 1 to 15 degrees lower than yesterday, and especially those in East Coast regions should notice a bigger drop in highs this afternoon, along with easterly winds. But western regions are having highs that are similar to yesterday, and it will be mainly sunny in central regions, but certain parts of the country will see more clouds with a chance of rain in the east of Jeollabuk-do province this afternoon. Promising weather is in store for the general election tomorrow. Then temperatures will soar to the mid-20s by the weekend in the capital. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Thank you for watching. Do stay with us for a daily panel session coming up next.